4% of marathoners are ever gonna hit that sub-3 mark. Thankfully, I've coached dozens of athletes to get to that number, and if that's a goal that you have, make sure you watch this video to learn the exact strategies and techniques I use to get all my athletes to that finish line. What's up, I'm Sab. I'm currently training for the Olympic marathons myself. I coach at the Hive Training Center, so if you are a marathoner looking for a coach to get you to this finish line, hit me up at the end of this video and let's chat. Now, before we dive into performance, we need to have our baseline understood. And that is gonna come from 3 critical pieces of data that every coach will probably ask for. So if you're training yourself or building up this plan, this is gonna be really important for you to know. First is I wanna know what someone's VO2 max is. This is their top, their ceiling of what they have in their capacity. Now for most sub-3 marathoners, that's 56 to 65 ml per kg. Now all of VO2 max is the max amount of oxygen that our body can bring in to produce energy. And obviously the bigger the engine, the more speed we're working with. The second thing I would always want an athlete to know is their 10K time. And if they're in the range of 35 to 40, 41, even 42, is when we start to look at that sub-3 marathon time as real potential. Now, obviously, if you're watching this video, sub-3 is something you want to get towards. So I'm not saying you should rule out that goal altogether, but it wouldn't be a bad idea to potentially incorporate some stepping stone goals along the way, because that is a pretty huge gap to make. If we can't even hold the pace we need for a fourth of the time that we're expected to run it, it's going to be a massive climb up to that. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it certainly is challenging. And finally is, what is your threshold pace? We want to be racing just sub that threshold, and if we don't even know what that is, it's really hard to make a training plan that incorporates that. And a lot of training, especially if you're following something like the Norwegian training method, is based 100% off of that number. So if you don't know it, you're kind of in the dark. Now, once we have those data pieces, it's time to actually build the training plan. And this changes a lot based from person to person, male, female, what they're training for, what their history is, and all those things. But as general, for somebody who's chasing a sub-3 marathon, we're looking at 10 to 15 hours per week of training, and they're typically hovering 100K weeks on repeat. Now, I always train my athletes with a 3-week build, 1-week deload. This has been the most consistent injury-proofing training that I've ever implemented. I've seen great success with it. I highly encourage it. So let me break down a peak week for one of my athletes. So Monday is always a rest day, especially for those who are competing. This actually mimics what your race schedule will look like. We move into the week sharp and strong with a double threshold session on Tuesday. I'm a massive advocate for double threshold sessions. Wednesdays typically are midweek long run. For most folks, that ranges between 18 to 25 kilometers. Typically at a zone 2 pace, nothing crazy. Thursday, we're gonna incorporate some speed play. This might look like a fartlek, might look like incorporating some hill sprints within a longer run, like 16 kilometers or something. Fridays, active recovery, 10K, nice and easy, nothing crazy. Saturday, we'll incorporate a pure zone 2 run, typically around 20 to 25 kilometers, just because people tend to have more time on the weekends, so it's easier for them to do that. On Sundays, we might have 35 kilometers broken into 5K repeats at their marathon pace. So we're getting a little bit of speed play here, but we're also getting that endurance base built up. Now, I'm obviously an advocate of 2 things. One is cross training. So I really believe every runner should be biking at some capacity, because it is an amazing way to build up your aerobic engine without all the strain and the wear and tear of running. I ran 100K weeks back to back to back, and I still prefer to stack an extra 100K worth of biking onto my weeks as a way of building that aerobic engine without having to tear my body down. This is especially important if you're a runner prone to injury or find yourself just like getting sloppy in your runs. Definitely jump onto the bike. It's an amazing translation into your running power, and I think it's a phenomenal tool most runners don't utilize. And second is never skip your strength training. I think 2 days a week should be dedicated to plyometrics, a lot of lateral work, a lot of isometric work, and then I would do 1 day of heavy compound lifting just to build that muscle durability and get that tension in your muscle. And that 4th day I would use as kind of your prehab. So anything that's been flaring up in the week, you kind of change it week to week based on what you need. This could be things like hip flexors, a lot of ab work, maybe some thoracic spine, rotational stuff, the things that often get neglected when we're just in one plane of motion. As you're probably recognizing, the demand of a sub-3 marathoner is quite high. And so if we don't have that 1 week deload every month, you're gonna start to see burnout, you're gonna start to see exhaustion and fatigue build up, and that's something we wanna stay far away from. Now, what I find so fascinating is there's such an emphasis on increasing your mileage and increasing your time, and yet nobody talks about increasing your recovery as you make those builds. Here's what I want you to think about. Every single hard session that you do activates your sympathetic nervous system. It turns you into a fight or flight dominance response. This obviously is a stress state. And it's not until we move into a parasympathetic nervous system, which is our rest and digest, where recovery actually starts to happen, that our body begins to return to that baseline. Now, as a coach, I primarily measure this using HRV, our heart rate variability. When we see those high numbers, we know that our body is switching between fatigue and recovery, and that's good. That high variability is really important. But when I start to see an athlete that's having repeated low days with very little polarization in that pulse, we know that they're just in burnout, that they're in a stress state, and they're not actually recovering properly in between their sessions. Now, rest is often prescribed as something like a spa day or just chilling or foam rolling, but it's not just about resting, it's about restoring, like what actually brings energy, what actually brings joy. Runners have to be so focused, dialed all the time. And I think it's really important that on those rest days, you turn off that part of your brain and you just do things for the sake of doing them because you enjoy them and allow some leisure and fun into your life. Now, obviously, one of the biggest components of recovery is going to be your sleep. In fact, multiple studies have shown that athletes who sleep less than 7 hours a night are going to have a 51% increase in injury versus their counterparts who are sleeping 8 to 9 hours a night. And the last part of running a sub-3 marathon comes down to your fueling. The average marathon is going to cost your body 2,500 to 3,000 calories. Now, that number obviously slides massively depending on the runner, but here's what you need to know. Regardless of how many calories you burn, no body is going to store that many, and so we are always going to have to supplement it. For example, your glycogen stores are going to hold about 500 to 600 grams of carbohydrates, which only accumulates to about 2,000 calories. So it doesn't really matter whether that number is 2,500 or 3,000 or 3,500 or 4,000. You're nowhere near that unless you're supplementing it with fuel. What I like to remind my athletes of is your fueling is not just about race day. Anytime you are on those long efforts or you're in a tempo set where you're constantly pushing, you need to be practicing 8 weeks out from your race with the exact fuel and the exact simulation that you're going to use because your gut needs time to adjust. In the race, we might be looking for 60 to 90 grams of carbs per hour. That's super ideal. And then we also have the carb load leading up about 2 days out from the race where we want to be eating between 7 to 9 grams of carbohydrates per each kilo that we weigh. The thing with a sub-3 marathon is there's simply no room for error. So you cannot mess up one of these components and still expect to have the performance of your lifetime. It is literally about having each of these elements completely dialed, completely set, and then you're good to go. Now, if your goal is to run a sub-3 marathon, make sure you're following this channel for more super helpful tips and tricks on how to make that happen. I honestly believe a sub-3 marathon is in the books for anybody who's willing to work hard enough and go after it.